The first promise of redemption. Redemption did not begin centuries later. It began the same day humanity fell. Before Adam and Eve fully understood the weight of what they had lost, God spoke words that carried more than judgment, they carried hope. Hidden within consequence, woven into sorrow, was a promise powerful enough to outlast death itself. It came quietly. Not announced with celebration. Not explained in detail. Not understood fully in that moment. But it was there. A promise spoken into brokenness. When God addressed the serpent, his words reached far beyond the garden. He spoke of conflict that would continue through generations, between deception and truth, between darkness and light. But then, at the heart of that judgment, God planted a future reversal. There would come an offspring of the woman. One who would be wounded, but not defeated. One who would confront evil directly. One who would crush what had deceived humanity. This was not just punishment for the serpent. It was the first announcement of rescue. Adam and Eve may not have grasped the full meaning, but heaven did. Redemption was no longer a possibility, it was a certainty. The fall did not force God into reaction, it revealed a plan already prepared. Why the promise came first. God did not begin with rules. He did not begin with condemnation. He did not begin with abandonment. He began with hope. Because humanity could not survive exile without it. The promise told Adam and Eve something essential. Their failure would not be final. Their disobedience would not define the end of the story. Evil would not have the last word. Even as they stepped into a broken world, they did not step into despair. Redemption begins with God, not humanity. Notice this carefully. Adam and Eve did not ask for redemption. They did not negotiate forgiveness. They did not offer restitution. God initiated it. This reveals the heart of redemption. It is not earned by regret, effort, or perfection. It is born from God's character. Redemption flows not from humanity's goodness, but from God's faithfulness. Even when trust was broken, God remained trustworthy. The meaning behind the promise. The promise spoke of conflict, not comfort. The future rescuer would not arrive into ease. The path toward restoration would pass through suffering. Evil would strike back. Pain would not disappear overnight. But the promise also spoke of victory. The serpent would wound the heel, but the head would be crushed. The imagery was deliberate. A wounded heel slows movement, a crushed head ends power. Evil would cause pain, but it would not prevail. Redemption would cost something. But it would succeed. Hope carried forward through generations. Adam and Eve left Eden carrying loss, but also expectation. Every child born afterward carried the question. Could this be the one? Human history moved forward under the shadow of that promise. Sacrifice, prayer, faith, longing, all echoed Eden's hope. Every act of trust whispered, God has not finished. Redemption unfolded slowly because humanity needed time to understand its need. The depth of brokenness had to be revealed before healing could be fully received. What redemption truly means. Redemption is not merely escape from punishment. It is restoration of relationship. God did not promise to simply erase consequences. He promised to heal what consequences exposed. Redemption would address shame, not just sin. Fear, not just failure. Separation, not just behavior. The first promise of redemption declared something breathtaking. God would not give up on His image in humanity. Dust mattered too much to be abandoned. Breath mattered too much to be wasted. Love mattered too much to be withdrawn. Why this promise still matters today. That ancient promise still shapes the present. Every moment of hope and despair traces back to Eden. Every belief that brokenness is not the end echoes this promise. Every step toward light and darkness is rooted here. We live in a world still marked by the fall, but also still moving toward redemption. Pain remains real. Struggle remains constant. But so does hope. Because the first promise was not revoked. It was fulfilled over time. The story does not end at the gate. Eden's gate closed, but God's heart did not. The promise ensured that history would move forward with purpose. That suffering would carry meaning. That love would outlast rebellion. Humanity was no longer innocent. But it was not abandoned. And so the journey continued, not back to a garden, but toward restoration greater than Eden itself. What was lost through choice would be restored through faith. What was broken through doubt would be healed through trust. What began in a garden would one day be completed beyond it. Redemption did not arrive as a solution after centuries of failure. It appeared immediately, spoken into the silence that followed humanity's fall. Adam and Eve still stood in the garden, ashamed, exposed, uncertain, when God spoke words that reached far beyond their moment. They did not yet understand exile. They did not yet know the weight of labor, pain, or death. But God, who sees the end from the beginning, knew that without hope, the human story could not continue. So before humanity walked away from Eden, God planted the future inside the present. Hope hidden inside judgment. God's words to the serpent sounded like judgment, but they carried something deeper. They spoke of struggle, conflict, and pain, but also of an ending that would overturn deception itself. There would be hostility between the serpent and humanity, between lies and truth, between darkness and light. But then came the promise that changed everything. From the woman would come an offspring, a human descendant, not an angel, not a force, a person. This detail mattered. Redemption would not come from outside humanity, it would rise from within it. The same dust that fell would one day be lifted. The same flesh that failed would one day obey. The promise declared that evil would wound, but not rule. The serpent would strike the heel, causing pain, suffering, delay. But the head, the source of authority and power, would be crushed. This was not a temporary victory. It was final. Why God spoke the promise so early? God did not wait for repentance to offer redemption. He did not require Adam and Eve to prove remorse before revealing hope. This reveals something essential about God's nature. Redemption begins with God's initiative, not humanity's readiness. Adam and Eve did not fully grasp what God had spoken, but they did not need to. Hope does not require full understanding, only trust. God gave them something to carry into exile, something stronger than memory and deeper than regret. Without this promise, Eden would have been only a loss. With it, Eden became a beginning. Redemption is not the erasing of consequences. The promise did not cancel the fall. Pain would still exist. Work would still be hard. Death would still come. But redemption redefined what those things meant. Suffering would no longer be meaningless. Struggle would no longer be pointless. Pain would become part of a larger story, not the final chapter. God did not promise to restore innocence. He promised to restore relationship. The fall damaged trust. Redemption would rebuild it, not by removing choice, but by inviting surrender. A promise carried through generations. Adam and Eve left Eden with loss behind them and expectation before them. Every child born afterward carried a question hidden in the heart of humanity. Is this the one? This question shaped history. It shaped sacrifice, because humanity understood that brokenness required cost. It shaped prayer, because hope looked beyond the present. It shaped obedience, because trust had been wounded and needed to be rebuilt. The promise moved quietly through generations, surviving failure, rebellion, and silence. It was not always understood correctly, but it was never forgotten. God was not rushing the story. Humanity needed time to understand the depth of its need. The weight of separation had to be felt before restoration could be embraced. The cost of redemption. The promise made something else clear: redemption would not be painless. The one who would crush evil would also be wounded. Victory would pass through suffering. Healing would come through sacrifice. This revealed the heart of God. He would not save humanity from a distance. He would step into its pain. He would allow himself to be wounded to restore what had been broken. Redemption would not be cheap, but it would be complete. Why this promise still shapes us today. Every human longing for justice, healing, and renewal traces back to this moment. Why do we believe broken things can be restored? Why do we hope love can outlast failure? Why do we sense that evil is real, but temporary? Because redemption was promised before despair took root. The world we live in still carries the scars of the fall. But it also carries the direction of redemption. History is not circling aimlessly, it is moving forward. Not back to Eden as it was, but toward restoration greater than Eden ever knew. From garden to future. The gate of Eden closed, but the path of redemption opened. Humanity was no longer innocent, but it was not abandoned. No longer whole, but still chosen. No longer unaware, but now invited to trust again. The first promise of redemption did not answer every question. It answered the most important one. Is this the end? And God's answer was clear. No. What was lost through doubt would be restored through faith. What began in a garden would one day be completed in restoration. And the story of humanity would now move forward, not in hopelessness, but in expectation. Adam and Eve did not leave Eden with answers. They did not know when redemption would come, or how the promise would unfold, or what the future would demand of them. They left with something quieter. Hope. Not loud enough to erase their grief, but strong enough to walk beside it. Each step away from the garden carried loss, but also meaning. The promise God had spoken did not remove their pain, it gave their pain a direction. What had been broken would not be ignored. What had been lost would not be forgotten. God had not promised them an easy road. He had promised them a faithful end. And so, beneath unfamiliar skies, Adam and Eve learned to live forward. Every sunrise reminded them that darkness did not last forever. Every breath reminded them that the same God who formed them from dust still sustained them. They were no longer innocent. But they were not abandoned. The promise followed them into the world, into labor and birth, joy and sorrow, love and loss. It moved quietly through generations, carried in faith, whispered in prayer, remembered in longing. Redemption had begun, not with certainty, but with trust. And that was enough. Because the God who spoke hope into judgment was the same God who would one day fulfill it. What was lost in the garden was not forgotten. It was waiting. Waiting for the moment when the promise would rise from shadow into light, when brokenness would meet healing, when the story that began with a fall would move toward restoration. And until that day, humanity would walk on. Not in despair, but in expectation. The garden was behind them. But hope was ahead. And God, faithful, patient, unchanging, walked with them still.